Being a dad is certainly a very challenging thing, and last month I was so glad that we got to take some time and talk about moms, and now we're going to turn and look at dads. You know, there are 5 things that I think, as I think about my own experience, of course, with having 5 children. I've been a dad for a long time. My oldest is 16, my youngest is 7. And so I've kind of experienced the gambit of things up through the teenage years, and I haven't experienced adult children yet, and I know that that's a whole new world there, no pun intended with the video. But it's going to be, I think, a challenge, and really all of us know someone who is a dad, is married to a dad, had a dad, you know, so I think it's very relevant for us. But I also know that today can be a hard day. If you didn't grow up with a dad, or your father's passed away, I know it can be a hard day, just like for moms. And so I want you to know that I'm aware of that, and I'm sorry for that. For those of you I know that struggle with that on this day. But nonetheless, the role of the father is an important role for us, not just as individuals, but as a culture. That civilization is built upon the foundational building blocks of the family. And without that foundational building block, the whole of society collapses. And we can look at different examples in history when that model has fallen apart in cultures and civilizations, and they have become no more. And so it is very important for us, I think, to zero in and talk about what it means to be a good father. That what those responsibilities are, the importance of those things. You know, maybe we grew up lacking some of those things, and that's okay. You know, they can be overcome, but it's going to be hard. I read an interesting statistic. It was from Herald News, or the Good Herald News. I can't remember exactly how that goes. But it said that half of female inmates that are in prison, half of them did not have a father figure in their life growing up. I think that's interesting. I think that tells us the importance of that role for all of us. And as we begin to talk about those challenges, I think the first one is that the work is never done. There are a lot of tasks in life where we can put it on a list and say, this is what we've got to do. We accomplish that task, and then we're done. But being a dad never ends. I mean, the moment that you have a baby or you adopt a child, that never stops. And so that wears on you for a while, you know, after a while. You know, that responsibility can become very draining. That's one challenge. A second challenge is that the return on your investment as a parent can take a long time to see. You know, when I invest money in something, I would like a quick return. I don't want to put my money in something and wait 40 years and then get it back. You know, that's hard to do, because when I think about myself in 40 years, hopefully, I mean, I'm not going to be alive in 40 years, but you know, there's a lot of time in between, and it's hard for me to wait for that. And in parenting, many times decades go by before you see the return on that. Now, I've been a parent just long enough that I'm beginning to see that in my older children, that some of the things that I taught or tried to teach or tried to live out for them a decade or more ago, I can see a glimpse every now and then of those things coming out, and that's exciting and encouraging. But I can remember, especially when the kids were young, it was very hard all the time, because I never saw any return on that investment. Number 3, I think another challenge is that being a dad is the ultimate act of unselfishness. In a lot of ways, you give up things that you would like to have in your life, or the way you would like for your life to be, so that you can have these little ones that you train up in your life. And in a sense, you give up some things with your wife. You know, that there is time that my wife has to give to my children, and rightfully so. I mean, that's a good thing. And attention and energy, and both emotionally and physically, that is a taking away from me, that is a loss for me. And so, in so many ways, it is a very unselfish act, at least if we do it the right way, because we are giving up some things. And that's not a bad thing by any means, but it is certainly a sacrifice that we have to make. And I want to challenge you today, if perhaps you really are struggling with that as a parent, that you just feel like, man, I'm just drained constantly, and it's just take, and there's very little give back, at least this point. I mean, I would want to remind you that someday you'll possibly be in a nursing home, and so there may be some payback then. I always keep that in the back of my mind. But more seriously, I think that we have to remember that it's a long distance race, and that just as people have invested in us, whether dads or other father figures in our life have invested in us, we so must invest in this younger generation. The fourth challenge I think that we have is that peace and quiet become words without meaning. I find myself seeking peace and quiet more than anything else in my life. Now that's kind of surprising because I'm actually a very loud and obnoxious person typically, and not necessarily for my voice, but I like a really loud stereo in my truck, and I'm one of those really annoying people that you hear coming down the road. And so there's really some obnoxious loud things about me, but since I've had children, my car stereo volume's gone down, my home stereo volume's gone down. Just anything I can do to seek after peace and quiet. I can remember several times last year I just drove out to Mark Twain, in the middle of the day over my lunch break and just sat there, in the total quiet. All I heard was the birds and maybe a few snails kind of inching along. And so I find that challenge of finding that is nearly impossible. At our house, we have kind of a little deck on the back of our house, and there used to be, when I was building the house, I was thinking, man, this is going to be perfect because whenever it gets loud and crazy inside, I'm just going to go sit out on the deck and kind of escape it. Well, the problem with that is, number one, you can still hear them outside from the inside through the brick and everything. They can go out multiple exits, especially on the basement patio if they go outside, and of course, bam, they're going. Then let's say they're at school, they're gone, they're doing something. Well, then the dogs are out there. And of course, they're barking as people come along at squirrels and gophers, or as my oldest daughter says, golifs, and we're still working on that. Golifs, yeah, on what gophers are and groundhogs. So, peace and quiet is something that is seemingly unattainable. And if you're older and your children have gone on, to their careers and other families, you may be experiencing too much peace and quiet. But at least at this point in my life, that's something I seek after. And then lastly, I think for us dads, sometimes the weight of supporting a family can be a burden that is almost too heavy to bear. That the financial burden, the emotional burden, the time burden of always needing to be there for someone to do something, to help with some project or to fix something that's broken, that there are not enough hours in a day to accomplish those things. And so ultimately you have to let your kids down, you have to let your wife down because you can't be everything and do everything, and then that can become very discouraging and very defeating. So I want to take some time to speak to some of these challenges and to offer you some encouragement, but also perhaps to offer you a rebuke. If you are not living up fully to the things that you need to be living up to as a father, as a parent, then I want to challenge you, maybe kind of nudge you, make you a little uncomfortable in a good way to stir you to those things, or perhaps just to reignite a fire within you so that you have the desire to be that person that you need to be. Proverbs 14:26 says, "In the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have refuge." So really, I think the act of being a father, of being a mentor, of being someone that disciples someone who's younger, really begins with the fear of the Lord and the seeking after of His wisdom. That there is a way of things, there is a system at work in life. And we can either choose to cooperate with that system and receive blessing and goodness from that system, or we can fight against it and we can receive the curses and the negative impact that system puts out. And so in a more theological or in a more perhaps metaphysical way to talk about that, it's really a sense of doing God's will. It's a sense of participating in the family the way that it was designed. Because there is design. There is a right way to be and to do things, a right way to live, and a wrong way to live. And so we have to choose what's right. And that is increasingly more difficult in a culture that rejects the notion of truth. That there is some kind of absolute truth. That probably if you just randomly interviewed people, particularly in urban areas, and you asked them, well, what's truth, what's right, what's wrong, most people don't really believe that there is a right or a wrong. They would say, well, what's right for me may not be right for you, and what's wrong for me might not be wrong for you. And while certainly there are cases where there are preferences, whether you prefer red or blue, well, there's not a right or wrong in that. Whether you prefer carpet or hardwood, whether you prefer brick or vinyl siding, those are all preferences. So that's not what we're really talking about, but we're talking about things like the command to love your children, to sacrifice for them, to train them up, to live out what it is to be a godly mom or a godly dad. There's a right or wrong to that. There's a right or wrong way to do that. And I think for me, I tend to focus on the negative, on the things that I don't do, the things that I fail to accomplish, and so I'm a little hard on myself. But at the end of the day, that's how we learn, right? And when we critique ourselves, when we examine ourselves, and we look at how we're living and the choices that we're making, then I think from time to time we need to look at what adjustments need to be made. Do we need to be more patient? Do we need to make more time available for our kids? Do we need to be willing to give to them in our time, or take time to teach and explain something? Those are difficult decisions, and there have been many times where I have failed to do this, that I have just been busy with some other thing, maybe a good thing, maybe a church thing, or maybe something, getting something fixed around the house. There's just always things that seem to take us away from what is better or what is best. And that's taking that time to disciple and train up our children. Deuteronomy 1:29 through 31 says this. Then I said to you, do not be terrified. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God, who is going before you, will fight for you, as he did for you in Egypt. Before your very eyes and in the desert, there you saw how the Lord your God carried you, as a father carries his son, all the way you went until you reached this place. Now, this verse from the Old Testament, I think, is a great verse because it reminds us that the Father is a protector. The Father is someone that is that first line of defense, that shield. And I find that for many of us this comes naturally, but for others of us we have to really put ourselves out there and remember that it's our responsibility to protect and take care of our wife and our kids, to make sure that they're as safe as they can be, to make sure that we're living out a life that is one that is the protector. That if somebody is going to have to sacrifice, if somebody is going to have to do without, it needs to be us. It needs to be us. If somebody's going to have to carry, it's just like taking a bullet for somebody. You see the bullet coming and you put yourself in harm's way to protect them. That's our responsibility. And we need to be faithful to do that. Father certainly is a leader in the family, one that a child should look upon as a role model. Joshua 24:15 says, and if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And I know many of you have this in a plaque or a picture or something somewhere in your home. It's kind of a trend in our Christian culture, and that's certainly a good thing. I'm not in any way rebuking that. But I think it's easy to say that that's what we need to do and put something up that's visible as a reminder, which is a good thing, but to live that out is very difficult, because it's not just saying that that's what we need to do or telling our kids that's what we need to do. It's actually going out, walking that path, and inviting our wives, inviting our children to follow us. And that's very difficult. It's much more easy to sit on the couch with your remote control and say, well, you do this, you don't do this, blah, blah, blah. But to get up and to go out and to lead the way, it's very challenging. And yet, that is what we're commanded to do. A father gives instructions and biblical wisdom to his children. Deuteronomy 6:6-9. And these words that I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Imparting wisdom takes time. And I think that is one of the most difficult things of parenting, is to stop and to take the time to teach things. how to do something, why it's important not to or to do a certain thing, why we serve, why we give. Without doing that, we are crippling our children. And I find that so many times in life, I'm stuck with the desire to do that, and I feel like I don't have the time, or I haven't made the time to really live that out. And that's hard, because there are times when we have to say, you know what, I can't explain why right now, you just need to do this, or you need to trust me and do this. And so certainly that time is there, but I think that as a culture we are struggling to invest the time that is needed to teach our children the right things. To teach them how to build things, to teach them how to love people, how to be patient. I know my children probably get very tired of working on patience. We spend a lot of time working on patience, just sitting and being still, not talking, not doing the things that they want to do at the moment, not receiving that instant gratification. But why is that? Well, because we know as you get older and you get into life and you get into your career and you start a family of your own and you experience life for any amount of time, that patience is one of those horrible things that, at least it feels horrible to me, that is a requirement. We want to have a home or a car. We want to have a way to provide for our families, and that just takes time. It just doesn't happen overnight unless you just inherit a lot of wealth, which most of us don't. And so you have to work for those things and to be patient and to strive and to persevere. And if we fail to teach our children that important lesson, then they walk into adulthood crippled and unable to accomplish the things that are at hand. I wonder what would happen if another world war were to come upon us during this time. Would our younger generation have the resolve and the strength and the sacrifice to do what those men and women and families did for us almost a century ago in the Great War and in World War II? See, it concerns me a little bit, because what I see in our culture is one of selfishness, of instant gratification, of sacrificing and cheating our way to get certain things. Hard work is no longer something that is valued and esteemed. Sacrifice and delayed gratification, those are all things that seem to be rejected by our culture. And so it concerns me that as a nation, it's a question, could we really endure a hardship if we had to? If all of a sudden the power went off and we had to grow our own food and we had to become self-sustaining and to survive in community once again and rely on one another, could we do that? Are we trustworthy enough to do that? See, all of those cultural markers, they begin with the family. They begin with a man training up his children, loving his wife, and serving and sacrificing for them and teaching them those important lessons in life. And when we fail to do that, it not only harms us and our families, but it really is a detriment to our culture. And so it is such an important matter. And we were going through a lot of scripture today, and so I told Thomas, I said, don't wear yourself out putting them all up there. So if you stop seeing him up there, it's not because Chris and Thomas are just back there playing Clash of Clans. It's because I told him not to worry about trying to get them all up there. And don't play Clash of Clans either while I'm preaching, because, all right. Genesis 18:19 says, "For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him." Now, if you followed the story about Abraham in the Old Testament, it's really a story of God, of course, who is our Father, who is his Father, leading and guiding him, providing a way into the Promised Land. And that was really just a place where his descendants could thrive and build a culture, build a civilization, which, of course, they did. It became the nation of Israel and Judah. And similarly, we are called to do that same thing, to follow God, to allow him to deliver us into that promised land of life, or we might call it the American dream. We might call it prosperity. And we can all assign different things to that. Some of us might say, well, we've accomplished the American dream if we have a 4-bedroom home with 2-car garage and a boat. And, we might think of those things as being that prosperity, of being the promised land. But I want to challenge you that it's not those material possessions, it's not having certain degrees or accomplishing certain things in your career that gives you that prosperity. It's the more valuable things, the better things of loving your wife, loving your children, loving your husband, loving your parents, serving faithfully in the church with the people of God, being on mission, taking time to teach your children, being patient, persevering. Those are the things that bring prosperity and happiness. One of the greatest struggles of my life, even to this day, is that struggle with contentment. To be thankful for the things that I have. To be glad with and focused on what I have rather than what I don't have. Is a common problem. And I'll just get to that place where I'm content and I'm thankful. And then I'll see some ad on my computer or phone, or I don't really watch TV anymore, but you'll just see that new something that you want to have, or you'll be, what happens to me a lot of times, I'll be working hard and I've got to get from place to place, and I'll go to the gas station and there's that guy with that really nice truck and that really nice boat and he's headed to the lake, and I'm thinking, oh man, I would love to be headed to the lake right now, but I've got, 5,223 things to do. I don't know if you ever had that feeling, but it's just very frustrating. We like to, I don't know that we like to, but we tend to look around and see what everybody has that we don't have, and then we become discontent and we become frustrated. Many times, not so much now, but when my kids were really young, I looked around and I saw all the parents that were a little bit older than me and their kids that were a little bit older, and they could actually go out on dates and they could actually do normal things that married couples used to do before you had kids. And I just remembered I coveted that and I wanted that so bad, and it was just so frustrating to me, as I'm sure I have frustrated some of you unintentionally, because I've gotten to that place in my life where I can go out with my wife again and my children, more or less, a few broken arms and a few other incidents, but generally, we can get away with no one dying for at least a few hours, or maybe 5 or 6 hours to catch dinner and a movie and just to go for a drive or whatever. But I know that frustration, and so there's always going to be things that other people have that we don't have. Always. And it doesn't matter how much you have. It doesn't matter if you're Bill Gates or Donald Trump. There will always be things that you don't have. And if you can't learn to be content with the things that you have when you have little, I promise you, you will never be content with things when you have much. Because truly we all are rich. And that richness comes not from what we have, but from how we live our lives. And from the way that our heart interacts with our mind and our lives. A father rejoices when their son shows prudence and wisdom. Proverbs 23:24 says, "The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice. He who fathers a wise son will be glad in him." I'm still not to the place in my life where I truly know that. I've seen people that their children have grown up and they've prospered, and because of the way that they live their life, their children have been blessed and have entered a season of prosperity. And so I've seen that in other people's lives, and of course my kids are not fully grown yet in that sense, and so I'm not to that place. But I can imagine that there is an ocean of either great sorrow or of great joy at that time in your life. Because the days of really parenting, for the most part, have ended. We never stop being parents, but certainly when they're in our home and we see them every day, we have a lot more influence than when they're off living in another place and have their own family and their own careers. And at that time, I think I will either experience an ocean of joy, because I will think back to all the things that I sacrificed, and I will begin to see that fruit born out in their lives, and I will be so glad that I invested in them, and I will be so glad that I sacrificed. Or I will experience an ocean of sorrow because I squandered the time that I had with them to train them up, to teach them the better things, to teach them how to be a man of God, a woman of God. See, there's two options there. And so for you, I want to challenge you, if it's not too late for you, and if you're not training your children up in the way they should go, change. Change today. Because someday it will be too late. And someday when you're sitting there very peacefully and very quietly all alone, and it's just you, or it's just you and your spouse, there will be nothing really, for the most part, that you can do about how you raise your children. And maybe you're sitting here, or you're listening to this online, and you don't have children. But the fact of the matter is, Whether you have a biological child or not, there are young ones in our lives. And when I say young ones, if you're 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years old, there are 20, 30, 40, 50-year-olds to be discipled that need someone to encourage them, to teach them, to show them things. I think I went through a time of ignorance or know-it-allness from when I was about 12 to when I was about 19 primarily. And I thought I knew everything and I had an explanation for everything and life was so simple. And then all of a sudden I turned 19, 20 and got married and I realized I had absolutely no idea what I was doing and I knew nothing. And then I began to be teachable. And my father and my father-in-law, I think, probably invested more in me during those years when I was in my 20s than the time prior, because I knew everything before that time. And so no matter what your situation is, there are always people in your life that you can choose, because it is a choice, to disciple and to grow them up. And that's really the purpose of us as believers of coming together. It's not so that we can all come into a nice air-conditioned room and worship and have fun in church, because sometimes church isn't fun. In fact, a lot of times it isn't fun. It's hard because we sharpen one another. We challenge one another. We don't agree on things. And people rub us the wrong way. And we hear things that we don't like to hear because maybe we're wrong on something or maybe they're wrong. And so church is hard. But what's the blessing? What's the benefit of that? It changes us. It molds us. That when we're all generally following Christ together, that if somebody gets a little bit off out of the herd, then we go after them and we help them and we kind of scoop them up and return them to a place of safety. And so it's so important for us as a church family to do this together. That's why baby dedication is such a big deal in child dedication, because what we're saying is collectively as a church, we're going to train one another's children up. We're going to encourage them and help them and teach them, because parenting is hard. And sometimes we fail. Sometimes we can't be there. There's been times when many of you and others, as my kids were younger and growing up, I didn't see my child being a little hellion running around, and they did. And they grabbed them by the shoulder and shaped them up and taught them what they're doing was wrong. And we need that. That's important, to do that collectively as a church family. Because of a father's sacrifice, we're able to enjoy the fruits and provisions. Proverbs 27 says, "The righteous who walk in integrity, blessed are his children after him." And I think we can try to make a case psychologically and philosophically and so on and so forth that what we do isn't as important as what we say. We can tell our children, well, I'm doing this, but you shouldn't do that. That's bad. But my experience has taught me that what I live out has a greater impact on my children than what I say. I can say all kinds of good things in a sermon or in a lecture. We spend a lot of times, going into the rooms and having a come to Jesus meeting, as we call it. And they're just by the time that the meeting's done, they're just willing to agree to anything just to make the meeting stop. So that's also a strategy, parents. I'll just put that out there. You just wear them down, and they're just finally so ready to be done with that they'll just be like, okay, I surrender. I'll quit. I'll do that. I'll clean my room. I'll do whatever. But when we walk in integrity, when we walk in truth, when we put in the hard time and the long time that it takes to live life in the right way, our children see that. And whether they follow after that in that moment or not, they've at least seen what it looks like to do things the right way. Similarly, if we do things the wrong way, and we embrace or indulge in life-controlling behaviors and addictions, and if we're selfish and impatient, if we're critical and hard-hearted, by and large, our children will be the same way. We will reproduce those things in us. And so that's why it is so important to live it out by our actions and not just what we say. In fact, Exodus 34, 6-7 says this, "The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping that love for thousands, and forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers. Iniquity just means sin. On the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. Now why is that? Is that because God is a mean, vindictive, powerful being that He just wants to look for ways to curse us? I don't think so. I think what is being described there is that this very principle that we're talking about. That when we live out those curses, when we take the path that is unwise, that our children will, to some extent, suffer the consequences of that choice. Maybe not directly from what we do, but they will see that we made that choice and they will emulate that choice. We'll close with this. A good father disciplines his son and his daughters out of love and with love. Proverbs 3:11 and 12 says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, or be weary of His reproof," or correction. "For the Lord reproves or corrects those whom He loves, and as a father the son in whom He delights." So here's the thing, guys. And trust me, it is just as hard for me as it is for you, because I want my children to have things. I want them to not have to listen to my lectures and teaching, and I want to be able to say yes. When my kids ask for this or that, I want to say yes. And it's much easier sometimes just to say yes, because they wear you down and you're like, okay, just stop asking. But here's the thing. We are cheating them when we do that. We are cheating them when we give them things that we know are bad for them. Just like when our toddler reaches out to touch the stove and we stop them from doing that, or gets into our shop or plays with tools that are dangerous because we know they can lose a finger or a hand or an arm or a leg or a foot. And we say no, we stop them. Why do we do that? Because we love them, because we care about them, because we want them to prosper and to thrive. That's just imprinted on us. If we're anywhere in the vicinity of decent people, that's what we desire for them. But discipline is the same way. If we fail to discipline them, if we fail to teach them patience and long-suffering, to show them what's wrong and to dispense punishments for those things, we're harming them. And really what that is, it's a sign that we don't really love them. And I know that's a hard thing for many of us, because we've grown up in a culture where spanking is evil and disciplining our child is a bad thing. But I want to tell you, it's a good thing. And that discipline that you impart on them will protect them and bless them. Because remember, dads, what is one of our primary roles? To protect our families. And if you don't teach your child about the things that will harm them, you're not really loving them. And that's hard, believe me. There are seasons in my life where I feel like my kids hate me and they think that I hate them. And I hate that. I just really don't like that at all. But I know that some of those things are necessary, because if I really love them, I will sacrifice. And I will allow that hardship to be imparted on them and on myself, so that one day, they will prosper and be blessed from it. Let's go to the Lord and pray. God, I'm so thankful for all the godly men in my life, for my own father, who disciplined me and loved me and taught me things that were right and wrong. God, I pray for those that maybe have not had or do not have that father figure in their life right now. God, I pray that perhaps there would be some in our congregation today that would be willing to be that adoptive father. They would look around in their lives and see where those needs are and be a blessing to those families in an appropriate way. God, being a parent is so hard, and it is only by your grace and by your mercy that we can be sustained, that we can survive that experience. We know that many fathers just leave, they quit because it's too hard. And I empathize with that. Perhaps you're here today, or you know someone who's just quit and you need encouragement, or they need encouragement to get back in the game. God, I pray that you would lead all of us, wherever we are in life, however this applies to us. Perhaps we're wives and we're sitting out there and we have been challenged with these things. We maybe been had some compassion and empathy developed in our heart for our husbands that endure so much. Lord, would you help them to be an encouragement, to be a strength, to come alongside and never to shortcut or self-destruct or cut down their husbands in front of their children, to be that helpmate that you've called them to be. And Lord, lastly, for us who are currently dads, whether our children are grown or whether they're very young and not even speaking, Lord, would you sustain us? Would you give us the strength to endure, to love our wives, to provide and sacrifice for them, to love our children, to give, to remove ourselves from the driver's seat, from the thrones of our lives, to take a back seat, to give up some of the things that we love for a season so that we can be that husband and that father that we know you have called us to be. Lord, would you let us leave changed today? I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. May you be blessed and happy Father's Day.